Morning.
Good morning again.
Okay, so we're doing Yoma now.
Yoma.
Tractate Yoma, which is all about, technically, it's all about Yom Kippur. But
A little too early.
not too early. You're exactly on time. We're going to begin exactly on time. Okay.
I mean, too early to study Yoma.
No, it's a lot of just interesting. I got it to here. Okay. Right, so we're talking about counting the Jewish people.
Oh, back to counting.
Well, actually, no. So we moved on from counting, and now we're talking about we're talking about Shaul.
Shaul was a sad case.
Yes, yeah, tragedy. Great potential.
Tragic case. But the book of Shmuel is a classic, a real classic. Yep. That's where all the big books on politics and power and all that were based on. Had such a insightful way of describing it.
Okay, so now we're going to compare Shaul and David, and I'm going to, now that we have some people here, good morning, everyone. We try to begin exactly on time, so waiting for a few people to show up, and now you're all here, and now the Gemara is up there, and a good morning to everyone. And Michal, you put together a very nice deal last night.
Thank you very much. Thank you for being part of that.
Yeah, and if you ever get a hold of Rabbi Wolfowski, you can ask him. But I was told multiple times by different elder Hasidim that in that particular nusach, and we don't do the long kaddish first deal. But you'll ask him.
Yes.
Okay. So he wasn't there. Normally, I wouldn't want to step on anyone's toes. You know what I mean?
Of course. Yes. Yes.
Okay. So Amar Rav Huna. So we're talking about Shaul. We talked about counting, and how Shaul counted the people with objects rather than counting them. So Amar Rav Huna, Kama lo choli v'lo margesh gavra de more seaye, which means how little does a person have to worry or be concerned if God is with you. So Shaul ba'achas v'altalo. Shaul failed with one sin, and it counted to destroy his posterity in the monarchy. David Bishtayim, David failed twice, and it was not counted to remove him and his family from the monarchy. Shaul ba'achat, what was Shaul's one sin? Masa de Agag, the story of Agag. Ask the Gemara, V'ha'ika Masa de Nov era Kohanim. Wipe out Nov, the city of the Kohanim, which, as we discussed, that King David was running away from Shaul, and he came and he was starving and defenseless, and he came to the city of Nov, which is where the Mishkan had been, where the Mishkan was, the movable temple, because the temple hadn't been built yet. And what happened? They gave him food and a sword. And Doeg went and told Shaul, and Shaul went and killed the Kohanim for supporting David. So that was perhaps an even bigger sin than not killing David. Answers the Gemara, Amasa the Agag, the story with Agag, where he failed to kill Agag, which we talked about with regards in Tractate Megillah. It's written, I regret that I made Shaul a king. In other words, Shaul was already, and his family were already knocked off from the monarchy because of this story. So the story with the Kohanim was only later. David Bishtayim. David did 2 sins. Ma'ininu, what are they? Do Uriah v'hadu dahasasa. Uriah and the incitement where God incited David to count the Jewish people, and there was a plague, right? Because if you remember, God asked David, what punishment should he have? He says, let me fall into God's hands. Let me not fall. And there was a plague because God caused David to forget that you're not supposed to count the Jewish people directly, and it called a plague. But at any rate, this was David's sin, where he failed to count the Jewish people properly. So the question the Gemara asks is, he had Uriah. So you all know the story of Bathsheba. David saw Bathsheba; she's very beautiful. He slept with her, and then he had Uriah, her husband. He wanted him to go home, refused to go home. So he told his commander Yoav that when there's the battle, move back so Uriah will be isolated among the enemy and he'll be killed. So the question is, so he's guilty of Riyavikanami Masa de Bathsheba. Was the only 2 sins is the story of Bathsheba. So the Gemara says Hasam, in other words, the fact that he slept with Bathsheba. So there it says Iparumine, there it was exacted for him separately, as it's written, Vasakivsa Yishalem Arbatayim, you shall restore the lamb fourfold. And he was given, and he suffered in his family 4 tragedies. So in other words, the 2 sins that God overlooked were not overlooked, but kept him as king, were the killing of Uriah and the counting of the Jews in an improper manner. The sin of Bathsheba, he was punished 4 times for separately. So it's not counted. The person who's punished for his sins, according to the Gemara, that sin is expiated. So since David regretted his sin, many of the Tilim are about the sin of Bathsheba because he regretted the sin, and he was punished 4-fold for it. Now, what's the story with the sheep? So after he took Bathsheba and had Uriah killed, so what happened was that without an improper manner. One second. So what happened is that Natan the prophet came to David and said that once was a rich man with huge flocks, and there was a poor man who had only 1 sheep, and the sheep was like his pet, and it lived with him and ate from his plate and drank from his cup. And then he wanted to make a party, so he went and he stole the poor man's sheep and sacrificed it. So David said the person should die and he should have to pay 4 times for the sheep. So Natan tells him, because the prophets are not afraid of kings, Ataha Ish, you are the man, because you took Bathsheba and so on. So therefore David was, so for this sin, David decreed upon himself, let it be punished 4-fold. And this is all in the book of Shmuel. So how was David punished 4-fold? Yeled, the first child born to him in Bathsheba, died. Amnon Tamar v'Avshalom. Amnon was killed because he raped Tamar, and Avshalom died because he rebelled against King David. So because he was punished, you can't say that God overlooked it. Ask the Gemara, Hatam Nami Yiprao Mine. In the case of counting the Jewish people wrong, he was punished, as it says, Hashem caused a plague against the people from the morning until midday. Answers the Gemara, the punishment was inflicted on the Jewish people, not on him. Ask the Gemara. I'm sorry, go ahead.
You mentioned Amnon?
Amnon raped Tamar. Avshalom killed Amnon. So Tamar was raped and Amnon was killed, and then Avshalom was killed, and the first baby he had with Bathsheba died, so that's 4 punishments.
Wait a minute. You're talking about Tamar, David's daughter?
Yes.
Not the Tamar in Yehuda.
No, we're talking about what happened in the book of Shmuel.
Yeah. Amnon.
4 things. The first baby born to them was killed. Then Amnon raped Tamar. Then Avshalom killed Amnon. Right? Then Avshalom himself rebelled against David and died. Ask the Gemara, Hosam nami lo yiparim megufei. Even in these cases, those 4 punishments were from his children. He suffered through his children. He wasn't personally punished.
That doesn't even include the rebellions.
Right. So the oye yiparu megufei. So the Gemara says, no, he was punished in his body. Dom Rav Yehuda Omar Rav. Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav, Shisha Chadashim Nistara David. That David was a leper. He had sarat, not leprosy, but he had sarat for 60 months. Ufarshu Menu Sanhedrin. And the Sanhedrin withdrew from him in protest over the business with Bathsheba. In other words, the Sanhedrin refused to talk to him. David used to preside over the Sanhedrin. They would have nothing to do with him. So you see, by the way, that the proper kings of Israel, the prophets weren't afraid of them, the Sanhedrin wasn't afraid of them, and they censored him where necessary. And the divine presence blessed him. Because as we know, David wrote Tehillim. David was blessed with the divine presence, and that left him for his sin.
Where does this leprosy of David come from?
It's an Aggadic tradition, but we're gonna see. The Chsiv, as it's written, Yeshivu li yireyecha. David prayed in the longest Tehillim, the 119th. Return to me, may those who fear you return to me, and those who know your teaching. And it's written, return to me the joy of your salvation. So this is the Sanhedrin who would want to have nothing to do with him. And the joy of your salvation has to do with the divine spirit. So now the question is, where do we see that David had leprosy other than a rabbinic tradition? It may only be a tradition. Let me see. Okay, so let me take a look in Tractate Sanhedrin. One moment. This is discussed more extensively in Tractate Sanhedrin. So give me a moment. I'm gonna turn the page on our little compact book here. I don't think this book ever got used. You got to use it finally. Okay. Right here. By the way, the whole story of Bathsheba is explained more thoroughly in this part of Sanhedrin. So we'll get to it at some point. Here we are. One second. Here we are. I found it. Oh, okay. So the source for his Sarat is in the 51st chapter of Tehillim. What does it say? It says as follows: Techavseini bi'ezov etar. Purify me with hyssop, and I shall be purified. Who gets purified with hyssop? The Metzora. I'm going to show you. Let me show you right here. Here. Mitzvah. So how do you how do you cleanse the leper? The person has sarat, which is a special skin disease that came to people do certain sins. Then shall the priest command to take from that is to be cleansed 2 living clean birds, which means kosher wild songbirds, and cedar wood and scarlet and hyssop, azov. So, which is, by the way, the labain. If you get in Israel the Middle Eastern soft cheese, it's usually has olive oil and hyssop and azov on top of the cheese. Anyway, so David says in chapter 51 of Tehillim, Tichateni be'ezov etar, I'll show you, cleanse me with hyssop and I shall be purified. Why did David specifically need azov? The answer is as a punishment for his sin. He was given sarat, not leprosy, but given this disease sarat. And therefore he had to go and here we are. Tehillim 51. Here, see? Right here, number 9. Pasuk 9, chapter 51. Chateni be'ezov etar, purge me with hyssop, and I shall be clean. To chabseni, wash me, mishel galbin, and I shall be whiter than snow. So what do we see? We see that David needed cleansing with hyssop, and that is done for the tzitz mitzorah. Therefore, we know that David had sarat. That is the biblical source. Because much of Tehillim is David pleading for God to forgive him for the sin of Bathsheba and Uriah.
It's interesting how he's using the language hamitaher. It's not hamtaher, hamitaher.
Well, because it's reflexive, the one being purified.
That's the famous one in the Torah, hamidaber.
Right.
She makes a big deal out of it. And who else is commenting on the same way? No other than Luther, Yamach Shemo.
What about the Shlishi Hamadaber, the third the narrator?
Yeah, Hamidaber. From there was a voice coming out of the
Mishkan.
Of the Mishkan.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Only those in the Mishkan could hear it.
But now we have another question. David did more sins. Rav. And again, to better understand this piece, it's worthwhile going over the book of Shmuel, the second book of Shmuel. But be that as it may, so Vama didn't Rav accept Lashon Hara like Shmuel that about Ziva. So Ziva told the son, David took Mephibosheth, Yonasan's son, under him. And when David had to run away from Absalom, Ziba, his servant, went and tattled on Mephibosheth that he was happy for David's downfall. And David punished Mephibosheth, but really it was all a lie. So the Gemara says that we hold like Shmuel, who says David did not accept Lashon Hara because Mephibosheth was rebellious and his claim was true. What about Rav, who said that David did accept evil reports because it wasn't true? Why wasn't he punished from it? When Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav, when David told Mephibosheth, you and Siva, the servant, shall divide the field. David told Mephibosheth, because he rebelled against him, I'm taking away half of your field and giving it to Ziva. So Heavenly Voice says, oh, you divided the field unfairly. Rechavam, your grandson, and Yeravam will divide the kingship. Your kingship will be split in half because you did injustice.
You call it Ziva or Tzivia?
I think his name was Sivya.
No, Tzivia was...
Tziva. His name was Tziva.
Oh, Tziva, because Tzivia was David's sister.
Yeah. Very good. Yossel, I am impressed. Very good.
Sometimes I'm impressed myself where they're getting it.
Well, you know your Tanakh. Ben Shana Shaul. Now, since we're discussing David and Shaul, we continue discussing them. Ben Shana Shaul b'mocho. Shaul was 1 year old when he began ruling, which is ridiculous. Rav Huna, what does it mean? Kiven Shana Shalotam Tamchet. That at the time that he was He became king. He
Oh,
was like a 1-year-old baby who never tasted the taste of sin. In
that
other words,
was
before he messed up, it's
clever.
very interesting. The Gemara basically is telling us that as an individual, Shaul was very, very righteous. As a leader, he failed, which is interesting because sometimes a person can be a very good person, but not be a very good leader.
That's
And
very true. Very true.
I mean, I
He
can
could be
think
very talented without knowing how to deal with people.
what's not dealing with people. It's also just, because his humility was in the wrong place. He listened to the people instead of telling them what to do. Maskifla Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. The Gemara is Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says Ema say that he was like a 1-year-old Shemaluchluk B'tiklu V'tzoa, who's always filthy with mud and excrement because he makes in his diaper and wanders around in the mud. Maybe he was saying he was a very bad person. Rav Nachman said this. He saw a scary dream. He had a terrible nightmare. Omar, he says, "Nanesi lachem atzmim Shaul ben Kush."
Bechelme from Chalem.
No, in his dream, he said, "I humbly submit myself to you, the bones of Shaul and Kish, and beg your forgiveness." In other words, he saw that he had a bad dream. He had a scary dream because he had disparaged Shaul, who was very righteous. He's still in a bad dream. He says, "I beg your forgiveness for the bones of Shaul, the son of Kish, the king of Israel." And then finally, no more nightmares. Just want to take a look here. What kind of nightmare was it? Just one moment.
It's pretty amazing how much stuff is dedicated to Shaul, considering that he was king only for 2 years.
Yeah, well, Shaul is a major figure, and Shaul is a fascinating figure because, on one hand he was so great, on the other hand he fell into such, bad things. He was chasing David. He killed the priests of Nov. He's a tragic figure.
Very tragic, sick. Today they would give him a pill.
Maybe the problem was deeper.
Well, I can see, being threatened by.
This is utterly fascinating. This piece is fascinating. One could spend a long time talking, but we're just going to learn it. Amar Rab Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, why did Shaul's kingship not continue to the future generations? Answers the Gemara, there was no flaw in his ancestry. He came from a perfect line of men and women from the house of Benjamin, whereas David was descended from Ruth the Moabite, that it was a big question if she was allowed to convert at all. Rabbi Yochanan said in the name of Rabbi Shimon Yotzadok, we do not appoint someone as a leader over the people, unless there's a box of creepy, crawly things to liolo machorav hanging behind him. In other words, a good leader has some questionable people in his ancestry.
Oh my God, that's where this is coming from, because there is a midrash on the Kupa Shel Shratzim.
Yes.
If somebody comes from a questionable background, they say they hang a Kupa Shel Shratzim when he walks away so people can.
Why? If a leader becomes proud of himself, look behind you. In other words, you're nothing special. You come from a questionable background. Don't get so arrogant. In other words, the person who's perfect person who comes from a perfect background tends to think they're always right. A leader always has to question their actions and question themselves. You look at King David; he made big mistakes. He did wrong things, But if you look at Tehillim, he's constantly tearing himself apart and questioning himself and regretting things that he did. David was humble and questioned himself. Shaul was sure of himself.
You know, Yeshayahu Leibovich uses exactly this thing, and he is using it with Moshe Rabbeinu himself.
I'm listening.
About his own heritage, because I think there was a problem there. Married an uncle or something. His parents, right?
Yeah, his father married an aunt, which is not allowed after.
Exactly. So Yeshayahu uses that kupa shel shratzim.
Well, it's true of Moshe too, I guess.
Yeah, he was one of them.
But the point is that when and more than that, there's something deeper here. What was questionable in David's ancestry? Rus the Moabite. And we learn that a Moabitess can convert, just not a Moabite man cannot join the Jewish people. So what happens is that David, in essence, is dependent on the ruling of the sages, on the interpretation of the Torah. So David is dependent on the Sanhedrin for him to be considered at all a Jew. So, in other words, David has to rely on the Sanhedrin, on the high court and legislature of the Jewish people for him even to be considered a proper part of the Jewish people. Yeah, so he's not going to be arrogant and run around and decide himself what to do. He's going to humbly submit to what the Sanhedrin tells him.
But on the other hand, I don't think the Sanhedrin had much of a choice. They were not going to undo the book of Ruth.
Right. So here's the interesting thing. But it's the sages who put the book of Ruth in the canon of the Tanakh. Okay. Now, but now we have a problem. The problem is, why is it the case that God was easy on David and tough on Shaul? Why was Shaul led to commit the sins? Precisely because of one of his good characters that's bad in a king. Because he forgave on his honor. A king cannot at all allow his honor to be disparaged. He must keep his dignity and punish anyone who disparages him. Because there has to be awe of a king. As it says, certain no good, worthless fellows said, how will this person save us? And they despised him. They didn't bring him his gifts, and he made himself as if he was deaf. And then Nachash Ammoni came and marched up against Yavesh Gilad. Why did Nachash attack? Because he saw Shaul was a wimp. So even though Shaul was big and strong and brilliant and holy, his humility was misplaced, because a leader must be strong and not accept any disparagement or insult to show that he's a strong leader.
Rabbi, I was going to ask you something that you mentioned before. So Shaul is being criticized by Shmuel when after the war with Amalek, which was successful after all, he won the war. And then Shmuel says the kingdom is going to be taken away. And I think you mentioned something that God said, I made a mistake.
Nichamti means I regret, but Nichamti really means I changed my mind.
I changed my mind. This is a little problematic. To say that God changed his mind doesn't sound right to me.
The Rambam deals with it, and basically the Rambam says that God gave people free will, and their choice, and God basically set things up that their choices affect what God does. So it's not that God who changes, it's people who change. So because Shaul behaved in a certain way, God says I've changed. But really what that means to say is that God set the world up in such a way that when you abandon God, so there are consequences.
So Shmuel changed his mind.
Not Shmuel, no. Hashem changed his choice of Shaul. But this change is a result of Shaul's behavior because God does not change. God sets up a system. And depending on our choices, that's what the system happens. That's how Maimonides would explain it.
Yeah, but this is a big problem throughout humankind.
Yes, the idea that God doesn't change, but
no, not only that, but always that fight between a prophet and a king, and a Cohen and a king.
right,
Moshe and Aaron.
except that we see by David that David submitted to the prophet, he submitted to the Sanhedrin. Ideally, the king has to obey the prophet and obey the Sanhedrin. And with Yirmiyahu, where they didn't obey, they had a lot of trouble, right? That's why the temple was destroyed, because they failed to obey the word of Hashem in the hand of the prophet. Okay, everyone, 12:30 today.
When do you place the first Sanhedrin to begin with? What year?
Oh, so the first Sanhedrin we know of is in Balotcha, where Moshe appoints 70 people to help him out. In Balotcha, right before the episode with the birds. That's the first formal Sanhedrin. So in the second year of their time in the desert.
Doesn't it mention
not long after the Mishkan was built?
Doesn't it mention Shivim?
It mentions 70, and Moses is 71. That's why it's a question. Sanhedrin is 70 or 71, whether you count Moses or Moses is too big to be counted. But the conclusion, the halacha, was 71. So we count Moshe as one of the Sanhedrin, because God says, take them with you. Okay, and we should continue with more of the adventures of Shaul, God willing, on Monday. This month, I'm away Wednesday, so we'll be on Monday. Okay, everyone?
Okay.
And have a good Chodesh, everyone.
By the way, when
is Erev Rosh Chodesh, so when I see you next, it'll be the first day of Nisan.
When are you publishing the Friday, the whole week's?
I would think early afternoon today.
And that's
probably around 2 o'clock.
It's going to be a new number?
Yeah, I'm going to do a new link for everything starting with Motzei Shabbat, because we've had the same link for 2 weeks. So I'm going to do a new link.
Oh, 2 weeks. Wow.
Yeah, I didn't do a week. I did 2 weeks. I didn't tell anyone.
Well, but
yes, 12:30 today. Yes, we're doing 12:30 today. Correct. As I mentioned, it's there in my email. 12:30 today. Friday, everything's back to normal. Okay, everyone, have a great day. See you soon if you want to join us at 12:30.
Shabbat Shalom.